recovered from an L6 classified event in the early 20th century. It's volatile, unpredictable. It took almost half a century just to figure out how we could stabilize it long enough to test. And when we did, we found that the military applications were limitless.
Fuse is developer Insomniac's first third-party title. What started as the extremely stylistic Overstrike, it's since traded in the cartoony vibe for what's still an over-the-top experience to compete in the increasingly crowded co-op shooter market. Oh, and it does feature Insomniac's trademark crazy weapons. So what's the verdict on Fuse? Let's find out.
Hostile spotted. He's, engaged.
Find out in a few hours.
Good night.
Fuse follows the mercenary team Overstrike 9, who are sent to investigate an underground base in Nevada. It turns out the base is home to various weapons development projects, which Overstrike 9 then uses for their own needs. From then on, it's a mad dash to stop a rival paramilitary group, Raven, from starting a Fuse-powered Doomsday event. I'll tell you, Fuse's story is decidedly gamey and not the focus of the experience. I didn't learn much about the people I was working for, my enemies, or the universe. It's all just a series of missions that blend together, and the antagonist turns out to be a painfully average megalomaniac. Strangely, Fuse does do a good job of making you feel like part of this elite team, but it does have a sense of humor to it.
You can't kill a senator.
Why not? I didn't vote for him.
Once you get used to the non-standard button layout, Fuse becomes a decent cover shooter with a focus on cooperative play, but it does a good job of accommodating for those who play alone. The gameplay's main hook is each character's distinct Fuse weapon. Jacob is armed with the arc shot, which lights enemies on fire. Izzy's shatter gun crystallizes enemies, leaving them vulnerable. Naya's warp gun creates violent singularities, and Dalton's mag shield generates a barrier which allies can shoot through, but has a lethal blast functionality that can take out multiple foes in close proximity. These weapons are the highlight of combat. Even though each gun is tied to a specific character, you don't have to pick favorites. Leaping between each member of Overstrike is seamless and fun. With that said, your team AI does leave something to be desired. They are invaluable in combat, but there are no squad commands or ability to designate high-value targets. On top of that, there are certain sections where the AI feels particularly artificial, namely during moments where you might want to play stealthier. When Jacob suggests a team should split up to take out a machine gun emplacement, he's clearly referring to a group of human players. The AI isn't planning on being that coordinated anytime soon. Worse, when a single ally bleeds out, AI or otherwise, you'll have to return to a checkpoint, which has been fun since never, but the game on the whole doesn't offer a great challenge. There's nothing incredibly fascinating about the gameplay, but nothing outright offensive either. It's reasonably fun. Fuse isn't without a few quirks. Some enemies are absurdly bullet spongy when playing alone, and Insomniac's track record of outlandish weaponry doesn't go beyond the 4 distinct Xenotech weapons. The rest of the armaments are extremely generic but fun nonetheless. Beyond that, there's the Echelon mode that pits you and your team up against wave after wave of enemies. It's a fairly arcadey mode that gives you abundant amounts of Fuse credits to further develop your character beyond the basic leveling structure. Fuse isn't an especially great looking game. The effects and environmental detail are nothing impressive, and if you like seeing a huge variety of environments in your shooters, Fuse will disappoint you. There's also a disconnect between the slightly exaggerated character models and the more realistic art direction. The soundtrack is bassy as hell, if a bit familiar to certain sci-fi flicks. It's one long sustained note that rarely deviates, but it's admittedly pretty friggin' sweet, especially in combat. Fuse is a fun third-person shooter. It just has a limited audience as to who can enjoy it most. The story is forgettable, the gunplay is average, and the graphics are nothing to gawk at. But if you can get the right group of people to play with you, Fuse could be more than the sum of its parts. This is all well and good for what it is, but a shooter with a focus on co-op is a tough sell when practically every other shooter on the market is including some form of this feature. It's a good game that just has a difficult time finding an audience.
I see what's coming.